Montana Territory, July 1878. The sky cracked open with thunder, just as Georgia Zeller's boots hit the muddy road outside the church. The storm rolling in harder than the words that had just been spoken at her back. "You'll never be a wife, Georgia. Not with that mouth." The door slammed shut before she could catch her breath. Her wedding dress, simple and hand-sewn, clung to her legs in the rain. She did not cry. She could not. The words were stuck in her throat the same way they always had been, locked tight behind lips that had never moved fast enough for anyone's patience. Her fiancé had said he loved her, until the guests arrived, until she tried to say, "I do," and the stutter caught her like a snare. Then came the silence, the sideways looks, the whispers, and finally the back door swinging open, a mother's hand on his arm, and him walking out like she was nothing. Georgia stood alone in the road, soaked to the bone, her breath shallow. A wagon rolled up from the east, squelching through mud. The driver slowed as he neared her, reins in one hand, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His horse snorted, restless in the storm. "You all right, ma'am?" he called, voice low and steady. She turned, blinking against the rain. He jumped down before she could answer, tall and lean, with a worn duster and eyes like the edge of dusk. He looked at her for a moment, not with pity, but quiet curiosity. He did not look away when she tried to speak and failed. She swallowed hard. I see. "Come on," he said gently, holding out a hand. "Let's get you out of the rain." She hesitated, but took it. They rode in silence. She sat beside him on the bench, her dress stuck to her skin, her heart hammering like a frightened colt. He glanced at her every now and again, but did not push. The rain softened as they neared a small homestead tucked between the hills. "I'm Nolan Briggs," he said, stopping the wagon by the porch. "I've got hot coffee and a dry fire if you want." She nodded. Inside, the cabin was warm and worn, with shelves lined in books and a rifle resting by the door. She stood awkwardly near the hearth while he poured 2 cups of coffee. Her hands shook as she took one. "Do you live out here alone?" she managed, the word catching but pushing through. He nodded. "Just me. Had a brother once. He's gone now." She did not ask how. She knew the look on his face. "I do repairs," Nolan said. "Deliveries. Help out the ranchers west of here. And I break horses when the pay is right." He looked at her again. "You got a name?" She nodded. Georgia. Z. Zeller." He smiled, slow and real. "That's a good name." She stared at her cup. Everyone. S says it W wrong. Then they ain't worth saying it at all." Her breath caught. Later, she stood in one of his clean shirts, her dress drying by the fire. He had given her space, retreating to the porch with his coffee. The storm had passed, leaving the land slick and quiet. She stepped outside, arms crossed over her chest. "Thank you," she said. Nolan turned his head. "You do not owe me thanks, Georgia." She looked up at him then. He did not flinch at her stammer, did not fill the silence. He just let her be. After a long pause, she whispered, "He left me. I figured. I loved him." The words cracked, but they came. Nolan looked out at the hills. "Then he's a fool." She sat beside him, close but not touching. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The quiet stretched between them, but it was not heavy. It felt like something soft and waiting. "Did you ever love someone?" she asked. He was still for a long time. Then he nodded. "Long time ago. She died in childbirth. I never held on to anyone after that. Figured it was best." Georgia swallowed. I see cannot do anything right." He turned to her, his voice firm. "You stood in the road alone, Georgia. You walked away from someone who was too small to see your worth. That is not nothing." Her throat tightened. She had never heard someone speak about her like that. Like she mattered. Like her voice, broken as it was, still counted. "I feel be broken." "You are not," he said. "You just need someone who listens." They sat in silence again. The moon rose behind the hills. He did not offer to take her back to town. She did not ask. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "You can stay here until you figure out what you want. No strings." Just stay. She looked at him, eyes wide. "IW would like that," she said. He nodded, and the corner of his mouth turned up. Not in amusement, in something warmer. And for the first time in years, Georgia felt like she had not been left behind. She had been found. By the following morning, the rain had passed and the sky stretched wide and pale over the hills beyond Nolan's land. Georgia stood barefoot on the porch, her borrowed shirt falling to her knees, watching as mist curled between the cottonwoods. The air smelled of damp sage and fresh cutwood. She pressed her hands to the railing, grounding herself in the stillness. Inside, Nolan was splitting kindling by the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his motions unhurried. He hadn't asked her any questions she wasn't ready to answer. He hadn't looked at her like a problem to be solved. "Coffee's ready," he said, not raising his voice. She stepped inside, the warmth from the fire brushing her legs. The shirt she'd worn yesterday hung clean and dry on a nail beside the hearth. She changed behind the curtain he'd drawn across the corner of the room, folded his shirt neatly, and returned to the table. He poured her a cup and slid a tin plate across the wood, 2 eggs, a heel of bread crisped in lard. "I can help," she said, looking at the stove. "You will," he replied. "When you're ready." She blinked, unsure how to reply. No one had spoken to her like that before, as if her usefulness wasn't a measure of her worth, but something that would come in time. After they ate, he hitched the wagon and began loading fence posts into the back. She followed him without being asked, her braid tucked beneath her hat. The trail they took led west, toward a neighbor's pasture. The wagon jolted over ruts, and she kept one hand braced against the seat. The hat was too big for her, but she didn't say anything. Nolan spoke only once along the way. "Man's land backed into a coulee. Elk break the fence every spring. He's getting too old to mend it himself." She nodded. When they reached the pasture, he showed her how to hold the post steady while he drove it in with the maul. Sweat darkened his collar, and by the 3rd post, she'd rolled up her sleeves and taken the sledge herself. "You sure?" he asked, brows raised. She looked him in the eye. "I'm not going to be break." He stepped back, watching. She was slow but steady. When her arms trembled, she stopped, steadied herself, then raised the maul again. By the time they finished the last post, the sun had shifted westward and a breeze had picked up, lifting the scent of dust and dry grass. Nolan handed her a gourd of water, and she drank, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "You ever work land before?" he asked. "My father ran a wheat plot near Miles City. We had too many boys to need me much. You learn fast." She looked away, unsure what to do with the praise. Back at the cabin, she swept out the corners while he fed the chickens. That evening, he brought in 2 trout and set them to frying in a pan over the coals. She watched him gut and scale them without fanfare, his hands precise. "Did you always live out here?" "After the war," he said. "My brother and I built this place together. He didn't last long after I came back." She didn't ask what he'd seen. She could read it in the way he stood when stillness settled, the way his eyes scanned the tree line without seeming to. I lost my mother when I was 12, she said after a while. She was the only one who didn't try to fix how I talked. Nolan handed her a plate, then sat across from her, his knees brushing hers beneath the table. "You don't need fixing." She stared down at the fish. Her throat tightened, but not from shame. After supper, she helped wash the tin plates at the pump. The frogs had started calling near the creek, and the wind tugged at the lantern light. "I can sew," she said quietly. "If you have torn shirts or sacks. I've got a pair of canvas trousers that's near on worn through," he said. "Was thinking I'd patch them with pine, pitch, and prayer." She gave a small laugh, surprised by the sound of it. "You ever think about where you'll go?" he asked, voice low. She held the rag in her hands, twisting it slowly. "I don't know. IW was going to marry a man who thought I was a chore." "You're not," Nolan said. "You're a whole damn story." They stood in silence again, the only sound the water dripping from the pump. He turned toward the cabin. "Come sit with me a while." They sat on the porch steps, a blanket over their shoulders. She didn't speak. He didn't need her to. His hand rested on the worn wood between them, not touching, just close. And when she finally leaned just an inch closer, he didn't move away. That night, Georgia lay in the small cot he had given her, listening to the wind shift through the grass outside. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had not been cast aside. Maybe she had been carried forward. 2 weeks passed in the steady rhythm of work and weather. Georgia rose early, pulling on worn skirts and boots Nolan had found in a crate beneath his lean-to. She tended the hens, gathered wild currants from the slope past the creek, and mended what could be mended with scrapcloth and quiet focus. She spoke more each day only when she chose to, never rushed, and Nolan listened with the same patience he gave a green horse or a wild field. One morning he brought in a cracked axle board from his wagon and set it on the table beside a stack of pine planks. "I was thinking of heading to Livingston next week," he said, squaring the wood with a mark of charcoal. "Need to bring in feed for the winter. Could use another set of hands?" Georgia looked up from the sack she was stitching. "I don't know if I'm ready for T-Town." "I'm not asking you to speak for me," he said. "Just sit beside me." She nodded once, then bent back to her stitching. The day they left, the sky held a dry haze and the sun rode low, stretching their shadows across the wagon path. She'd braided her hair in a tight crown, pinned it back with a strip of muslin, and wrapped her shawl close. Nolan wore his best shirt linen, faded at the collar, and hitched the team with careful fingers. The road to Livingston was long and ribboned with dust. They passed travelers on horseback, a woman driving sheep, a pair of children walking barefoot with berries stained across their chins. Nolan tipped his hat to each without a word. Georgia watched the land pass, wide and open, but held close inside. She didn't speak until the town came into view, rows of wooden storefronts, a blacksmith's forge coughing smoke into the sky, and a church bell ringing the hour. Nolan stopped outside a general store painted white. The sign hung crooked. "I'll be in for seed and sugar," he said. "You don't have to come in." "I want to." Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and tobacco. A man behind the counter looked up, eyes pausing just a moment too long on George's mouth when she greeted him. She froze. Nolan stepped beside her, a bag of oats in his arms. "You've got a loose hinge on your back door," he said to the clerk. "Might be worth fixing, with the wind shifting the way it does." The man blinked, nodded, and moved on. Georgia exhaled. He was going to say something, she whispered, her hands tight around a jar of molasses. "He didn't," Nolan said. They left with flour, candles, and a bolt of thick wool. Georgia carried the molasses in her lap as they rode out of town. That evening, after the horses were fed and the wagon unloaded, Nolan stood beside the shed, hammer in hand. She joined him, brushing wood shavings from the bench. He looked over his shoulder. "You handled yourself fine." I froze. "You didn't run." She sat on the edge of the bench, her hands in her lap. "I've always been afraid of people's eyes. The way they look when I can't get the words out. Like I'm wasting their time." He set the hammer down. "Some folks think silence is weakness. They don't understand how much strength it takes to keep standing." She looked up. "You don't see me like that." "No," he said. "I see you." The wind shifted, bringing the scent of juniper and iron from the hills. Georgia stood and stepped closer, eyes steady on his. "I never thought I'd feel calm around a man again." "I'm not trying to make you feel anything," he said. "I'm just here." She touched his hand rough, still warm from the tools, and left hers there. "I want you to be here," she said, voice low. "If you want that too." He didn't move for several breaths. Then he turned his hand, fingers closing around hers, gentle and right. "I do." She smiled, not wide, just enough that it touched her eyes. And in the quiet between the hills and the stars, surrounded by the land that had held them both in their grief, Georgia knew she had said yes, not with perfection, not with ease, but with truth. And that was all he'd ever needed to hear. The wind came down from the crazy mountains, dry and restless. Georgia stood with her fingers curled around the handle of the water bucket, watching the dust swirl at the edges of the field where Nolan was driving the last of the fence line. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge behind the house, and a pale hush clung to the slope, broken only by the slow creak of the windmill turning. She walked the path toward the shed, boots soft against the dirt. Nolan straightened when he saw her, his shirt damp at the collar, hands braced on his hips. "You came out early." IW woke with the L light, she said. Couldn't sit still. He nodded once and handed her the hammer without a word. She took it, kneeling beside the half-built gate. Her movements had grown sure, not from practice alone, but from the quiet trust that had taken root between them. He didn't watch her work. He didn't need to. She was no longer a stranger on his porch. They finished the gate before the sun reached the cottonwoods. Nolan wiped his brow with a strip of cloth and leaned against the post. I've been thinking of building a second room off the back, he said. There's space, and I've got enough timber if I cut smart. She looked over the slope where the grass bent low and gold in the morning wind. You want more space? I want you to have a door you can close if you ever need to, he said. Not because I want distance. Because I'd rather you stay. Her eyes didn't leave the hills. I don't want a door between us. I know that now, he said. But I still want to build it. So if the day comes you need a quiet place, it's already there. She set the hammer down and stepped closer until she could see the sun catching the edge of his jaw. You don't need to protect me from why yourself. I'm not, he said. I'm giving you a choice. She reached for his hand, rough and warm. Then build it, she said. But not for distance. For shade in the summer and a place to keep the boots. He laughed, low and surprised. I'll take that. Weeks shifted around them, the days lengthening, the nights softening with crickets and the sound of branches tapping the windows. Georgia began sketching rough plans for a garden with a stick in the dirt near the porch. Nolan brought her a bundle of dry seed pods, saved from the last season. One evening, he returned from helping a neighbor birth a calf, his shoulders tense, a shallow cut on his forearm. Georgia opened the door before he knocked. What happened? Barbed wire, he said. Nothing deep. She took his arm without a word, guiding him to the basin. The wound was clean but red. She poured warm water over it, her touch steady. You don't take care of why yourself when you're out there. He watched her win the cloth, careful. I get by. I don't want you to just get by. He didn't speak for a long time. Then you're the first person who's ever said that to me. She tied the cloth and let her hand linger. Later, they sat by the fire, her legs tucked beneath her. He carved a length of pine into a spoon, the shavings falling to the floor. She held a piece of linen in her lap, stitching a hem with even hands. I've been thinking, she said, not looking up, about the land my father left behind. There's no one to claim it now. I don't want to go back, but maybe it could be something for us. If we ever needed more. You'd want that. I'd want it if it meant we had a place to grow old, with trees planted by our hands. He set the carving down. You've been quiet about what you want. I didn't know how to say it before, she said. Now I do. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Say it. She raised her eyes. They were steady, clear as spring thaw. I want a home with you. Not just a roof. Not just a place to stay. A home. That doesn't make me afraid of my voice. He stood, crossed the room, and knelt before her. You've already made it that, Georgia. Her hands trembled where they held the cloth. I couldn't say yes before. Not to the right man. Not even to myself. Can you say it now? She looked at him, every inch of him, from the rough line of his jaw to the quiet waiting in his eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes. He took her face in his hands, slow as sunrise, and kissed her. And in that kiss there was no rush, no apology. Only the long-earned truth of two lives woven steady by days and silences, and the aching want of something that would last. The wind outside turned again, but the walls held firm. The kettle warmed. The fire didn't flicker. And Georgia Zeller, who had once been abandoned for the way her words came slow, now spoke without fear in the home she chose, beside the man who had never needed her to be anything but exactly herself. The first snow came early that year, soft and slow, coating the ridge behind the cabin in a pale hush. Georgia stood at the window just after dawn, watching the flakes drift in the stillness. Her breath fogged the glass. She pressed her palm to the pane, fingers spread as though memorizing the shape of the quiet. Behind her, Nolan stirred a pot of oats over the cookstove, the scent of cinnamon lifting faint from the tin. He didn't speak until she crossed the room and sat beside him at the table. "Creek's icing over," he said, stirring once more. "If we want water for the wash, we'll need to bring it in by the barrel today." "I'll help with the sled," she said. "You sure you want to be out in it?" "I like the quiet snow brings. It reminds me that everything can slow down." Nolan looked at her long enough that she felt it, then ladled the oats into 2 bowls, handing hers across without a word. They spent the morning hauling water, their breath puffing in white clouds, boots crunching over the hardened path. Georgia wore a coat they'd stitched together from an old wool blanket, and her cheeks flushed bright with the cold. Nolan pulled the sled with steady hands, the barrel rocking lightly behind him. By midday, the sun broke through, lighting the snow with a soft gleam. Georgia paused at the edge of the clearing, one mittened hand resting on the sled's side. "Do you miss having someone to talk to about the world beyond this place?" she asked, eyes fixed on the fields beyond. "I don't mind the still." "Never have," Nolan said. "But I think I didn't know how quiet I'd gotten until you filled the space." She turned toward him. "I used to sit on the porch at my father's house and listen to the wind." He didn't talk much. "I think he never knew what to do with a daughter who wouldn't speak straight." "You talk just fine," Nolan said, brushing a bit of snow from her sleeve. "I know that now." That evening, they lit the oil lamp early and stayed close to the fire. Georgia read aloud from a book Nolan had found among his brother's things, a weathered journal of plant lore and prairie medicines. Her voice caught sometimes, but she didn't stop. Nolan whittled a pair of new handles for the kitchen drawers, nodding now and again as she read. As the wind picked up outside, she set the book down and crossed to the cedar chest beneath the window. She lifted the lid and pulled out a folded piece of muslin. "I was working on something," she said, spreading it across the table. It was a map hand-drawn, careful lines marking the boundary of the cabin, the creek, the slope of the field beyond. She'd stitched in thread the places they'd planted, the line of the new gate, the corner where the hens gathered in the morning light. "I thought maybe it was time to call it ours," she said. Nolan looked at the cloth, then at her. "You've stitched it into the land, and the land into me." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing her wrist. "I'd like to make it official." Georgia blinked. "You mean I don't want to call you anything but mine, Georgia? Not because I need to claim you, but because I want to walk beside you every day this land gives us." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "I'd like that." He nodded once, quiet and sure. "We can ask the preacher next time we ride in." "I don't need a preacher to know what this is," she said. "But I'll wear the ring if you want me to." "I'll make it," he said, "from the old ironwood by the creek." They married in the cabin with the first thaw. The preacher came up from the valley, his mare nosing through the last of the snow. Georgia wore a dress she'd pieced from linen and cotton scraps, dyed soft with walnut husk and blackberry. Nolan stood beside her in the same shirt he'd worn the day he found her in the rain, its collar mended where her needle had passed. The vows were simple. No music, but the wind through the eaves. When the preacher asked if she would take Nolan's hand, Georgia looked him steady in the eye and said, clear and without stammer, yes. They spent the summer building the room off the back of the cabin. Not for distance, but for the books, for the sewing table, for the quiet hours when one worked and the other rested. Nolan carved her name into the new lintel, not for show, but to mark the house as full, as whole. By the time the leaves turned, Georgia had planted the garden she'd dreamed of. Rows of beans and turnips, late squash and sweet corn. She sang to the soil without words, her voice soft and low as she worked. They grew old slowly as the land allowed. Come winter, she knit by the fire while Nolan read aloud from the journals she had kept notes on soil, on days of rain, on the way the light shifted in October. In spring, they walked the field hand in hand, the wind gentle against their backs. On the day Nolan finished the rocking chair for the porch, he placed it beside hers without ceremony. Georgia stepped out into the morning sun, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, and sat beside him. I've been thinking, she said, about putting in pear trees along the fence line. He nodded, rocking once. It's good ground for it. She leaned into his side, her hand resting on his knee, and together they watched the sky open wide, the land holding them in its quiet strength. Two lives stitched into the soil, into each other, into a peace they had earned slowly, wholly, and without doubt.